Hi, this is Stacy, the baby maker Roberts. I have put together more than a decade of my clinical experience into developing the first online mentoring program that deals with the ever-growing area of natural fertility. My Baby Maker Network Mentoring Program is an online interactive program where you will learn how to address all aspects of fertility issues. If you are ready to be a part of an atmosphere that helps you build your practice while helping couples build their family, I look forward to getting to know you in the Baby Maker Mentoring Program. Please go to bioceuticals.com.au and click on the Education tab for more information and to register.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And joining me in the studio today is Belinda Reynolds, who's a dietitian with over 15 years' experience in the integrative medicine industry. She's an acclaimed senior educator with bioceuticals, and she regularly presents to audiences throughout Australia and New Zealand, and is known for her practical and very easy style, bringing complex biochemical processes into an easily digestible format with practical clinical applications. And I welcome you back to FX Medicine. Bel, how are you?
I'm great, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Now, today we're going to be talking about the importance of seeding a healthy microbiota into children, into infants, neonates. But there's so many issues surrounding that, including, even the health of the mother, the diet of the mother. So I think let's start off. What happens, what's the general process of how good bacteria infect an infant's gut?
So that's an interesting question, actually, because there's been some research that has come out in very recent years, which has turned our previous understanding of the initial inoculation of the infant gut on its head. So in the past, we always believed or understood that the first exposure to bacteria did occur during the journey through the birth canal, and the infant was then primarily colonized by bacteria it was exposed to in the birth canal. During birth. What we've more recently come to understand is that there's an actual pathway of bacterial translocation whereby bacteria are taken from the mother's gut and delivered into the uterine environment to then be moved on into the infant, or the fetal, I should say, gut. And research has shown that the presence of those beneficial microorganisms that have been translocated into that fetal gut actually provide beneficial influences on the maturation of that fetal immune system. And there's been measurable changes that they've identified. One of the first ways that they found this was that there was bacteria and also bacterial DNA signatures present in the placenta, the amniotic fluid, and also the meconium. And they went on to take blood smears from pregnant women, and they identified the presence of the bacteria and DNA signatures there. It's believed that during pregnancy, there's an upregulation of this process of bacterial translocation that occurs as a result of different hormonal changes. And then these bacteria within blood monocytes are delivered to the uterine environment and directed by a number of different chemicals that are influenced by pregnancy hormones. Further to that, there's also a translocation of bacteria from the maternal gut to the breast tissue, and that's how it's believed that the breast milk then contains a broad range of different bacterial species, and that can be anything from lactobacilli to other potentially pathogenic microorganisms such as staphylococci species. And then mastitis is believed to develop when there is an imbalance there at the breast due to an insufficient amount of the beneficial microorganisms that help keep those pathogens at bay. So what we have then, first of all, is what's in the mother's gut is influencing what will then be colonising the fetal gut, and then that is having a an influence on the maturation of the fetal immune system. We then have the child moving through the birth canal during labour, and then that is further contributing to the colonisation of the infant gut. Then you have breastfeeding forming another avenue through which there is that exposure to a variety of different microorganisms. You also, of course, have the skin-to-skin time, which is essential just after birth, not only for maintaining that initial connection between the mother and the child, but also for a transfer of microorganisms. And then, of course, there's a huge number of other factors down the track which will begin or assist in further developing that colonisation.
So a couple of things you mentioned there, and I think one is it just seems so critical that the maternal diet is healthy. And I remember reading a paper that if the maternal diet was poor, then that actually had an effect on the microbiota of the infant later on in life. The other thing that you brought up there was contact time. And there's a paper that I read on what's called seeding. So babies born of C-section, and they're basically swabbed with the vaginal secretions from the mother. But I have questions on that regarding the contact time, because a normal birth does not occur over seconds, and nor is that pressure light. And so when we're talking about smothering the baby in the vaginal secretions, it's really like mushing it into the skin. That's a lot of pressure that baby goes through to come out. And I just think that's a critical factor. And sorry to go on, but the next point was, I remember reading another paper about microbial clouds, and again, the contact time with the mother's skin and that bonding process. Indeed, feeding process will have an influence on the bacteria that the baby gets in the gut. So, to go back to the first one, can you comment on how important it is for a good, healthy maternal diet and what effect that has?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. The maternal diet will have a profound influence on fetal development simply due to the nutritional content of the diet. We know about the issue with iodine and iron. Yeah, so we know that plays a crucial role in supporting healthy growth and development of the fetus, but importantly too, supporting the health of the mother. During pregnancy and during lactation, it is believed that the body will consider the growing fetus and the breast milk as a priority for receiving nutrition. And so if the mother is not consuming sufficient nutrition, she is going to be the one who ends up depleted because the fetus will be basically drawing the nutrition out of her bones, from her brain, and that can contribute to a lot of complications for the mother, and that really doesn't help the fetus down the offspring down the track if the mother's suffering. And
we'll talk about that in another podcast that you and I are going to do on the influence or the emotional impact of birth and child rearing on women.
Yes, we will. It's a huge topic and
massive.
What I'm passionate about. So, but yes, moving back to the influence of the maternal diet on the infant microbiome, the consumption of prebiotic fibres is so essential for ensuring that the microbes in the maternal gut are being fed and they're able to remain and flourish in the gut. The production of the short-chain fatty acids through the process of the fermentation of those fibres by the bacteria provides such a broad range of benefits for the maternal gut and then also for her immune system and for a variety of other factors. But then further to that, as we've mentioned, the balance of good bacteria in the maternal gut can have an influence on what is available to be delivered to the fetus for assisting in that process of immune maturation. And then also research has shown, there was a number of studies done at the University of Madrid where they did identify that the balance of bacteria in the mother's gut was very closely related to the balance of bacteria that was detected in the breast milk. So if there was dysbiosis present in the gut, there was a greater risk of dysbiosis at the breast and in the breast milk, which could ultimately influence what then is colonizing the infant gut, but then also contributes to mastitis risk.
So I was just actually thinking about the causes, which, are medically, quote unquote, unknown. But if you look at these associations, you can draw links with, well, duh.
Yeah.
If you haven't got a healthy gut, you're going to have problems with the rest of the microbiota in other sites.
Yes.
As in on the skin, nipples, even mouth, whatever. So when the University of Madrid researchers did this research, did they actually link species? Like, did they find staphylococci in abundance in the gut and associating that directly with staphylococci in the nipple?
So that they were drawing associations, and so initially what they did was that they had identified the presence of bacteria in the milk, and there was the previous understanding that what was in the milk was simply coming from contamination from the child's mouth or from that skin around the nipple and the areola. And so what they did was they took a sample of the milk and they looked at the bacterial profile, and then they also took swabs of around the nipple and areola, the skin on the breast, to see if there was any correlation between the different types of bacteria that were there and the numbers. And they also took swabs from the infant's mouth. And they found that there was really no clear correlation between what was there. But they then took samples of stool samples from the mother, and they found that the balance of bacteria that was there was very similar in terms of lactobacilli counts and staphylococcus counts. And they did find that there was higher numbers of staphylococci. Staphylococcus epidermidis and Staphylococcus aureus seem to be the two key culprits which they identified. But interestingly, more recently, they're starting to find that Candida can be a common culprit in particularly recurrent and persistent mastitis. And then what they also found too was that there was high levels of lactobacilli counts in those women who were healthy as opposed to those who developed a mastitis infection.
And what you're talking about there is the Castle study, which was done by Lisa Amir and her group at La Trobe University. Some extremely good research which showed the different species of pathogens causing mastitis. So what then do we do?
It's a good question, because I think the issue is that generally the standard therapy for mastitis infections is antibiotics. And of course, if it's a candida infection, antibiotics could potentially even worsen that infection, which is one reason why we may have the development of these recurrent and chronic mastitis infections, the development of abscesses, hospitalisation, and then ceasing of breastfeeding because of all the complications. But what's also emerging is, of course, antibiotic resistance, where there's a lot of staph species that are now resistant to the antibiotics that are being prescribed. It's not to say that antibiotics aren't worth trying, but I think that probiotics can certainly have potential to assist in both prevention and the treatment or prevention of recurrence of mastitis infections. There has been some small studies done where they have shown that the use of a probiotic supplement can improve the colonisation of the good bacteria at the breast and then ultimately address or prevent a mastitis infection. So we know that the bacteria are able to produce those short-chain fatty acids, maintain that low pH or that acidic environment, which is less conducive to the pathogen overgrowth. The bacteria also produce a variety of antimicrobial substances as well, and also stimulate the host immune system to assist in improving the host immune system's ability to fight off any pathogenic infection. But I think it's important to note as well that it's not just microbial balance that's having an important influence on immune function. We know that vitamin D deficiencies can significantly compromise healthy immune function, particularly when it comes to those mucosal related infections. Vitamin D is essential for the release of cathelicidin, which is an antimicrobial peptide released in response to an infection or trauma at the skin or at a mucosal surface. So if an individual is depleted of that vitamin D, they can be at greater risk of those recurrent infections. So I think it's important we consider vitamin D status as well and address that if there is a deficiency. And we need to consider, of course, too, all of the other nutrients, really important for the health of our immune system. And I've even seen some interesting papers suggesting that selenium status and vitamin D status can actually have an influence on what colonizes the gut.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So our nutritional status can influence what is ultimately colonizing the gut. And then the presence of inflammation, so the activation of the inflammasomes, which stimulate a whole cascade of inflammatory issues, that can impact the balance of bacteria too. So it's a broad area, and I think we can't say that probiotics are the only answer, but they're definitely a very interesting one. Yeah,
and definitely part of the answer. But I think what you say is true. I was recently talking to Mike Ash, and he was explaining how critical it is to have adequate amounts of retinoic acid getting down into the gut to help make an adequate and promote the production of secretory IgA, and also to help with immune modulation, i.e. dampening down that inflammasome activation. There's that yin and yang with vitamin A and vitamin D. You know, the sort of, what was it, the retinol X receptor, raw gamma T, and Fox PT.
Right.
Yeah, so there's this yin and yang association with how vitamin A and vitamin D seem to act in concert to dampen. Now, it's certainly more elegant than that. And certainly we shouldn't just be giving 2 vitamins and thinking that that's going to cure all of the immune programming issues of infants. But I think the major issue here is that it's critical that the mother gets a good, well-balanced diet.
Yes.
Because what's interesting to me is that it's not just these vitamins and probiotics that's coming through in the breast milk to the baby, is it?
No, that's right. And the breast milk also contains quite a substantial amount of prebiotic type substances. So the oligosaccharides that are present in the breast milk, such as galacto-oligosaccharides, are actually the third most abundant component of human milk after lactose and lipids. So they're a crucial part of the development of a healthy immune system. So what they're doing is helping to feed all of the good bacteria or the potentially beneficial bacteria that are present in the gut so that they can flourish and produce all of the benefits that we know they're capable of. And I think that's where there is that increased risk of certain immune-related conditions and other concerns with formula-fed infants is that the formula that they produce these in recent times are very good in terms of their nutritional profile and, of course, so useful in those situations where women are unable to breastfeed or for whatever reason decide not to. But what they do seem to be missing is sufficient amounts of these prebiotics that are so essential for establishing a good colony of bacteria.
And I think we'll cover the pressures that women are under. I think the pressure is to breastfeed. And regardless of that being the natural thing, there are a subset of women who can't or choose not to, whatever, and they're under such venom. But we'll cover that in another podcast where we talk about the emotional aspects that affect pregnant women and young mothers, new mothers. Talking about the nutrition in the formulas, hey, breast is best. Breast is what nature provided, yes. Absolutely. Given that the diet of the mother is good, there I go again. But certainly there's things that we can do when, hey, we don't live in a perfect world. Certainly there's things that we might be able to do to say, okay, look, you might not be able to breastfeed or choose not to, whatever. So you're formula feeding. How can we make that as good as possible for that infant so that they have the best catch-up to breastfeeding?
So, I mean, there is some interesting research around this area and looking at different types of supplements and additions to formula, which can help to further develop the infant immune system to reduce the risk of allergies and suppressed immune function that can be associated with formula feeding. So one of those things is a balance of, or a combination of prebiotics. So a GOS and FOS combination in a 9-to-1 ratio has been investigated in a number of different studies, and one of the studies which they conducted compared the microbiota or the bacteria in the stool of breastfed infants to a formula-fed infant, and then again to an infant that was fed formula with the addition of that GOS and FOS, or the galacto-oligosaccharides and fructo-oligosaccharides. And what they found was that the breastfed infant had much higher levels of bifidobacterium and lactobacilli when compared to the formula-fed infant. However, when they'd added the prebiotic combination into the formula-fed infant's diet, what they found was a level of bifidogenic microorganisms that was very similar to that of the breastfed infant. So it was helping to establish a bacterial balance which was very similar to a breastfed child, which certainly has the potential to be more beneficial than the formula on its own. Further to that, some other research which has been done looking at the benefits provided by GOS and FOS for infants. Some of it's been done on formula-fed infants, some of it's been done on breastfed infants, so even further boosting the benefit that can come from breast milk. But they've identified that it has the potential to reduce the risk of atopy. It has the potential to boost secretory IgA production to improve mucosal immunity, reducing gastroenteritis risk, and also potentially reducing respiratory infections as well. Again, vitamin D is really important for a number of those functions, as is vitamin A and a variety of other things. So definitely not the only answer, but certainly something that should be considered, I think. There's also research that was done on very low birth weight infants who were at risk of necrotizing enterocolitis, and these infants were exclusively breastfed, but they added prebiotics into what they were being fed. And they did find that the addition of those prebiotics was able to reduce the risk of that necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC. And that's quite significant as well, is that not only is it assisting in boosting the colonization of that beneficial bacteria in the gut of a formula-fed infant, but it has the potential to assist a breastfed infant as well. Because I think realistically, most women don't have the greatest balance in her gut, and therefore what is in her breast milk isn't necessarily optimum either. So I think anything that we can use is definitely worth considering, particularly for those at-risk infants.
Yeah, I think it's a salient point that in Australia we have, I think it's 15 species of bacteria, probiotic bacteria, that we're allowed to choose from, whereas there are hundreds. You know, Mark Donohoe says thousands, most of which we can't grow. Of probiotic bacteria, fungi, even viruses living in our guts and indeed on our skin, that are normal inhabitants keeping us in an equilibrium. And that to suggest that 1, 2 or even 3 or, a few of these species could be the hero for you, for your health, is not just arrogant but really short-sighted. And so we should be really concentrating on our diet and to aid in these sorts of manipulation, if you like, of good bacteria, that we should be looking at these substrates that bacteria live off, and not us choosing, but our body choosing those bacteria then to choose its own equilibrium. I think that's so critical. But along that lines comes the nutrition, not just to say, I want you to choose that bacteria, but for the host to then have a good immune system to then help the balance of that bacteria. So it's all of this sort of interplay. There's no magic answer. No. And I just want people to get the right picture that it's not selecting a bacteria. It's providing the garden so that your body can choose its own equilibrium. I think that's such a critical message that we need to get across. None of this magic hero species. I don't believe in this sort of stuff.
No, but that's right. Not every bacterial species or strain is suitable for commercial production either. So we really need to be providing those fibres that stimulate all of the different potentially beneficial microorganisms that would naturally inhabit our gut. And it's interesting too, because when you look at the use of antibiotics, which we know to wipe out or at least reduce the numbers of a lot of beneficial microorganisms, the use of those antibiotics has been shown to significantly increase the risk of certain ailments. For example, they've identified a relationship between antibiotic use during pregnancy and the risk of asthma in the offspring. There's a dose-dependent relationship there. So the greater the use of antibiotics, the greater the risk of asthma and allergic sensitization in the offspring. And those antibiotics haven't just killed off one specific strain.
No, that's
you need
right.
to be re-establishing everything that's there, which is where the prebiotics really do, and the great diet really does come in.
Am I right in I say the word loosely, recalling with my brain, but that there was a paper saying that if you take one course of antibiotics, your gut microbiota is in aberrance for, gosh, I hope that's a word, is aberrant for about a year, that it takes about a year to recover, and that even if you have subsequent courses of antibiotics, then it just lengthens that amount of time that your microbiota has to recover. And so it's, again, critical that you remain on a high plant-based diet here to help the good bacteria find an equilibrium again.
That's
as
right.
well as seeding with good bacteria if you wish,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah,
So-
and that's the thing. There is fantastic research around a lot of probiotic strains and species, and they're absolutely beneficial, and there's no doubt that there's been some great research which has shown that, for example, a combination of bacteria in the final trimester of pregnancy and then for the first 6 months of the child's life was able to cut the risk of allergic sensitization in half. That was the Lab 4B blend from Nigel Plummer. So there's some fantastic research, and I think it definitely need to be paid attention to, and we should be considering those things. But what we're more saying is that it's not the be-all and end-all.
Well, it's not your bacteria.
Yes.
Even when these bacteria, quote-unquote, colonise, they don't colonise for the rest of your or its life. They remain there for, a few weeks, a couple of months at best, and therefore we have to keep taking them. If we want to reset our own stuff, we need to be feeding it
That's
the right
right.
thing. And I think that's a critical answer that both Mike Ash, Mark Donohoe, they get across really, really clearly. Beautiful, eloquent points that Mike Ash gets across.
Yes.
Okay, so Belinda, in wrapping up, what are the critical steps for practitioners to be able to have take-home points that they can introduce into their practice? What sort of things should they be paying heed to?
So I think, first of all, the point that you mentioned where the maternal diet it's so important, and the health of that is vital. So a good fibre-rich, plant-rich diet is the first and most important step to maintaining a healthy microbiome within the mother and therefore ultimately in the child. Secondly, probiotics can be used for assisting in reducing the risk of certain immune-related conditions. It's useful for them to be used during pregnancy and then in the first months of the child's life, or even for the first year.